Welcome to week 2, combining and comparing of the 9 quantities, or the measures from the 9 quantities. Last week we met the 9 quantities and we had some experiences measuring those 9 quantities, and I asked you to start to gather the language of the 9 quantities that you use. This week we're going to combine and compare the measures from those 9 quantities. So when we combine, there's parts. We combine parts to make a whole. And when we compare, there's usually a larger one, a smaller one, and a difference. And sometimes the part will be unknown, or the whole will be unknown, or the large one will be unknown, or the small one, or the difference. And the one that's unknown is the one you're trying to figure out and helps you decide what exactly you're going to do. Now, we met last week the pennies. And we had 2 parts to our pennies. We had 144 pennies minted before 2010, and we had 47 pennies minted after 2010, and the whole was 191 pennies in all, right? So those are the parts and the whole to this problem, to this scenario. So let's see, if I have 144 pennies minted before 2010 and 47 minted after 2010, how many pennies do I have in all? This is the whole that's unknown. Now, if I know the whole is 191 pennies and 47 pennies were minted before 2010, I could ask how many were, and I want to keep the 47 pennies minted before, then how many will I give away? And the ones I would give away would be the part of them that were minted before 2010. Yeah? And then I could compare them. Do I have more old pennies or new pennies? And how many more? Right? So I have the old ones, the new ones, and the difference. And once I have that difference, I can say my old pennies plus the difference is my new pennies, or the total pennies minus the difference is the old pennies. So I can make 3 more problems out of differences. All right. Then once you have this quantity, you're going to measure the number of pennies. I'm going to count, in this case, the number of pennies. And I ask one of these questions about combining or comparing is actually dealing with the numbers. So let's see. When I said I had 144 pennies minted before 2010, I think of them as the hundreds, the tens, and the ones. So I might write that 144 as 100 plus 40 plus 4. And I might write my 47 as 40 plus 7. So I've taken my pennies and I've grouped them into hundreds, tens, and ones. And I think if you look at my picture to the right, you can see the shiny pennies are the new ones. Do you see my 4 tens are my 40 and my 7 ones? And the darker pennies, the more aged ones, do you see my 100? I have 10 little stacks all in a group there of 100. And there's my 4 10 stacks and my 4 individual stacks. So my 100, my 4 tens, and my 4 ones. And so when I ask how many pennies do I have in all, I can go and say I have 100 stack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 10 stacks. That's 80. And then I have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 individual stacks. I could take those 11 and I could make another stack. So I'll have 9 stacks and 1. So 100, 9 10, and 1. 191. Do you see how I use the language of the pennies to add? Yeah, I don't just start some procedure that has nothing to do with my pennies. Let's see. If I had 191 pennies in all, and I wanted to keep only the 47 minted after 2010, how many would I have? So the question is, I start with 191 and I end with 47. How many do I give away? So look, I could start counting down. 191 minus 1 is 190. I could take away 100, and that would get me to 90. I could take away 40, and that would get me to 50. And I could take away 3, and that would get me to 47. So I'm counting down to, I guess, a benchmark number, something I like, 190. And then even better benchmark. Then I took away a benchmark, 100, to get me into the tens. And then I can take away as many tens as I need to get me near 47. So altogether, I took away 1, 100, 40, and 3, which is 144. Do you see how I added those? I added the hundreds, then the 40s, then the ones, without actually moving them around. I just did that I moved them in my head. Yeah. And then let's see, do I have more old pennies or new pennies? And how many more? Well, clearly I have more old pennies. I have more than 100 old pennies and less than 100 new pennies. So 144 is greater than 47. Use the greater than sign. And how many more? Well, look, I'm going to subtract the hundreds. 100 minus 100 old pennies and 100 new pennies, so that's just 100. And then 40 old pennies minus 40 new pennies, that's 0 pennies. And then I have 4 old pennies minus 7 new pennies. So I don't have more old pennies right here, right? I have, I have, I have more new pennies. 3 more new pennies. Now I'm counting those. I'm going to call those negative pennies because, I could take away 100 pennies and have 100 pennies left. I could take 40 new pennies away and from the 40 old pennies, right? I have 0 left when I compare those. But when I try to take away the 7 pennies from the 4 pennies, I can't only take 4 away, then I need to take 3 more away. So where am I going to take those 3 away from? Well, I can't take them from these individual pennies. And look, I can't even take them away from the 10 pennies because I don't have any 10s left, but I do have 100. So I'll take those 3 away from the 100 and get 97 pennies. So what I wanted to show is when I subtract and add and subtract pennies, combine and compare pennies, even when I'm working with the numbers, I make sense out of them. I don't move to memorized procedures. So let's see. On each of those problems, I could summarize, right? I had the 144 pennies minted before 2010, and the 47 pennies minted since 2010, and I had 199 pennies. So I could summarize by saying I was counting. Ellen, I was counting pennies. Some part were minted before 2010 and some part were minted after 2010, and it gave me a total number of pennies. So do you see how I am now summarizing the parts and the whole of this particular problem? If I was to summarize every time, I would help my students to understand that every one of these combining and comparing problems has some parts and some wholes. All right, I'm going to do another one. This time I'm going to do weight. So do you see the strawberries in my basket? They weigh 435 grams. I know this picture's a little small for you to see, but I looked way up close when I actually did the measuring. And then the basket itself weighed 65 grams. And so I had to take that into account. If I want to know how much the strawberries weigh, it turns out the strawberries don't really weigh 435 grams because that plastic basket weighed 65 grams itself. So I need to subtract the 65 from the 435 to see just how much strawberries I was going to eat when I was weighing them. All right, so I'm just going to start at 435 and I'm just going to count down 65 grams and I'm going to count 10 grams at a time. So 435. Now you can't see me, but I'm using my fingers. 425, 415, 405, 395, 385, and 375. I have now touched 6 of my fingers, meaning I've now counted down by 10 6 times. So I got from 435 to 375. Now I'm going to count down by ones, and I'm going to count down 5 times. And again, I'm going to touch each finger to keep track. So 374, 373, 372, 371, 370. So a good way to subtract is just to count down. Count down the 10s, count down the ones, and I have 370 grams worth of strawberries. Another way I can do it is to count up. I can start at 65 and I can count up to 435. So I can count up 35 to get to 100, 65, 70, 80, 90, 100. Yes, it worked. And then once I'm at 100, I can count up 300 more to get to 400. So 100, 200, 300, 400. And then I can count up 35 more to get to 435. So I've counted up 35, and then 300, and then 35 more. 35 and 35 is 70. 370 is 370. I could have counted 300, 35, 45, 55, 65, 70. I could have counted the 300, then 35, and then counted up 35 more. Or 30 and 30 is 60, 5 and 5 is 10, 60 and 10 is 70, and 300 is 370. So subtracting, counting down, adding, counting up, I can add up from 65 to 435. I don't distinguish that much between adding and subtracting. I teach them together because they make sense together. I often read a single problem and can do either one. The question is, am I combining or finding the difference? And now I'm going to summarize again. I was weighing, right? I, Ellen, am doing some counting and measuring, and in this case, I'm weighing. I'm not counting, I'm weighing. And what was I weighing? Strawberries. Counting of pennies, weighing of strawberries. I usually have an object I'm counting, like pennies or strawberries, and then I'm counting or measuring one of the 9 quantities. Counting individual objects last time, weighing this time. And I had a part of strawberries, and I have a part of the container, and together they made a total. So I still had some parts and a whole. And I was looking for the difference. So the larger part, I had the larger part, which was the strawberry and the container. And I had the smaller part, which was the container. What I didn't have was the difference. So I was looking for the difference. If you are to summarize at the end of each problem, often we bring students together at the end of the class to summarize the lesson. If you can summarize the structure of the 9 quantities that we're measuring, and then the structure of the part whole are sometimes thought of as combining parts stay at whole, or sometimes finding the difference between a larger and a smaller one. So adding and subtracting, combining and comparing. If every time you look at an adding and subtracting problem, you ask who's counting, that gives children an opportunity to share their names, what they're counting, that's the object they're counting, and one of the 9 quantities that they're counting or measuring of it. So the counting the individual pennies or the weighing of the strawberries. And then how are we organizing them? And for addition and subtraction, when we organize by parts and wholes. And we're either combining them or finding the difference. So this week, we'll be counting or measuring some things and then combining and comparing them. And I hope you guys have some fun doing it.